Welcome to another video from explainingcomputers.com. For over 30 years I've been building computers, but whenever I've put together a desktop PC I've always used an off-the-shelf case. And so in this video I'm going to do something more radical and scratch build a Mini-ITX enclosure. Right. Here we have two Mini-ITX motherboards, a ROC5 ITX RK3588 ARM system and a much older MSI x86 board fitted with an Intel Core i3-4330T. Both have the standard 170 by 170mm Mini-ITX form factor and can be mounted in any standard PC case or in a variety of Mini-ITX cases. These include larger cases like the Thermaltake VL5202 that I used for the i3 build back in 2014, as well as for the N100 system I replaced it with in 2023. There are also much smaller Mini-ITX cases like the Morex 3320 that I used for my Silent PC build back in 2020, and which have an external power supply. Alternatively, there are slightly larger Mini-ITX cases like this InWin Chopin, which at one point did house my ROC5 ITX, but which now, if we take a look inside, has got a Milk 5 Jupiter RISC-V board. And I really like this case, not least because it's got a small custom internal 150 watt power supply. But given the price, I'm not keen to get another of these, and I've always wanted to build my own PC case. And so the time has come to do just that. The idea is to make a case that will take a Mini-ITX board, and for this build we're going to be using both of these for test purposes. I want the case to be as small as possible whilst including its own internal power supply and having comfortable room for the motherboard connectors. Other requirements are for a front power switch and front USB 3 connectors, as well as an internal mount for a 2.5-inch SSD. However, I'm not going to accommodate a PCIe card, as I'll only be working with boards with integrated graphics and ample onboard storage connectivity. As some of you may know, a few months ago I built a Cyberdeck, and this has been a big inspiration for tackling a custom Mini-ITX case. The Cyberdeck is made from ABS plastic sheet, sprayed on the top with a satin black paint, and then on top of that a clear lacquer. And this worked very well indeed. This is probably the best thing I've ever sprayed in terms of surface quality, and even after a few months and sort of fairly rough handling, there's no obvious evidence of damage to the surface, and this therefore gives me a great deal of faith in using the same method to build a PC case. I was also very pleased with the way other things came out on this build, particularly at the back here we've got a button and USB connectors and also these grills, and so these are all things I'm going to incorporate into the Mini-ITX case. Over here we have our main build materials, and these include lots of 2mm ABS plastic sheets. I think I've got enough of these here. I've been buying up extra stocks, and I've also got these which are 4mm square ABS rods that I think may prove useful. There's then some liquid polyadhesive, some Humbrol liquid polyadhesive, which I'll use to solvent weld parts together, and the parts will be cut using our old friend Stanley the knife to score, and then I'll snap the parts to build the case. Also here we've got some aluminium foil tape, which I was planning to use to provide some level of EMI shielding, although I'm having second thoughts on this and I'll return to this topic later in the video. Finally, we have got some 10mm M3 standoffs and associated screws that I'll use to mount the motherboard. Often motherboards are mounted using 632 UNC standoffs and associated screws, but I found these hard to source to work with this build, and so as I keep M3 standoffs and screws as a stock item, that's what we're going to be using. Meanwhile, over here we have a PC power switch with integrated LED. That's rather exciting. We've got a unit here with two front USB 3 connectors, and we've also got this cable which attaches to a PC motherboard, which can be attached to that using these cables. So let's get all of these open. There we are. There is all the exciting parts. And I should have said that whilst I'm building the Mini-ITX case as both a fun project and a learning experience, my plan is to end up with a case that costs no more than an off-the-shelf model. However, I have spent quite a bit on these two particular components, the power switch with its LED and the front USB 3 ports, because I chose to buy very nice quality components. Talking of components, our last very critical and most expensive one is the power supply. Unlike in the in-win Chopin case we looked at earlier, here I had to purchase a standard size, and in this table we can see the common options available. I did initially consider using a small form factor or SFX power supply like this one I've got here. But in the end I've gone for a TFX or thin form factor unit, and specifically this one is from GameMax. It's their GT450G 450-watt model, which is overrated for our needs in this system, but I hope it'll be a nice power supply for our Mini-ITX case. So let's open it up. There we are, this is our power supply with dimensions of 152 by 85 by 65 millimeters. If we go back to a motherboard to which I've attached some standoffs, I've put its I/O shield in place, I've stood it on a piece of ABS plastic, and if we bring in the power supply, it'll go in something like that. The whole thing will be a little bit shorter than this, it'll be cut off something about there, something like that. And as you can probably see, the power supply fan ends up here. It'll pull in air on the inside, exhaust hot air out the back. I'll say more about cooling of this system a bit later on. But hopefully you're now starting to get a feel of how things are going together. I'm also starting to get a feel of how things go together. That's rather important. And so I think it's now time to grab Stanley the knife and to get on with some cutting. Greetings! Here I am back again, and some cutting has indeed taken place on this rather old but still functional cutting mat. I've been busy with Stanley the knife, and we've made two pieces, and this is one of the two base pieces for the case. Why has it got two bases, you ask? Well, it's because this is 2mm ABS sheet, and I want my base to be very thick, so it's going to be 4mm by having two bases put together, but they won't be quite the same size. And also having two base pieces will allow me to recess the screws that will hold the motherboard risers onto this piece. I'll show you that in the next part of the video. And clearly making the base piece has really defined the size of the PC case, as has this part, which is the back piece, which has got cutouts for the power supply and holes to mount the power supply, and also a cutout for a motherboard I/O shield. And this was removed by just scoring and scoring and scoring with Stanley the knife. Took a great length of time. Here's the piece I removed. It came out pretty cleanly, as you can see. And in theory, we can now take a motherboard I/O shield and put it in here, and it'll pop into place. If I've got this right, I think I have. It works. I'm very pleased that worked, because I was a bit worried it wouldn't, because this is clearly much thicker at 2mm than a standard back of a PC case, which is made out of metal sheet. And just to prove it works universally, let's try a second motherboard I/O shield. This is the one for the Intel i3 motherboard we looked at earlier. Does it go in? It does. It all clips in. Yes, it works. And so if we take these two pieces as well as the power supply and the motherboard, we can start to get a feel of how everything is going to fit together. And there's a few little gaps at the side of the case you might be wondering about. On this side there's a gap because this is where we're having our mount for an SSD. That'll be put in obviously as we go along. And on this side you might be thinking about the gap between the power supply and the edge of the case. And this is because I'm going to have a sliding top on this case, and there has to be a bit of room for the mechanism to allow for the top to slide. So if we have a shot of the side, my next task is to mark the positions of the motherboard standoffs, and this will allow me to drill some holes in this base piece, after which I'll make the second base piece and we'll start putting things together. Right, a lot more scoring and scoring and scoring and scoring and snapping action has now taken place, along with a little bit of drilling. And the end result is this. we now have our back panel attached to a much stronger, a 2 thickness base piece. This is now very tough, and it's also got the motherboard standoffs in place, as you can see. And as I discussed earlier, if I just do that, underneath the holes for the screws in the lower piece of the baseboard are slightly bigger, so the screws are actually recessed. And as I said, it's good and tough, this is. And you might have noticed I've also started adding in some reinforcement pieces along here, which is starting to make it tougher. And I've also put in place here at the end there a sort of edge that the power supply goes up against. There's another edge for the power supply here. And eventually the power supply will have edges all around, so it will drop in place. It'll keep it nice and secure, and it'll just be held by the screws rather than having all the force on the screws on the plastic back plate. And I've already tried mounting in this the i3 motherboard we were looking at earlier, and that worked very well indeed. Everything was nice and secure, nice and tough. And having done that, I also want to try mounting in here the Rock 5 ITX motherboard, so let's do that. There we go, and once again everything lines up. You do see how many wires we're going to have to accommodate inside this case, but they will all go in. But as we can see, when the power supply is held against that edge, it's nice and secure. This is coming together rather well, and I say it's good and tough. It's really made it much stronger having that double thickness base piece. And it's very hard to stress significantly enough, I think, how important getting the baseboard and the back piece in place are, because these ultimately are things that make everything work here. By the time we've got those in place with the motherboard standoffs, all the right cutouts and holes and the power supply mounting holes, if those are right, everything else should work. It's really now just colouring in, building the rest of the case. Greetings! Things have now progressed rapidly, with the case now having sides and many other parts and reinforcements. If we take the power supply and drop it back in as another test, like that, it drops in, there it goes. It's now supported on all sides, nice and secure. You might have noticed in my last part of the video there was a bit of flex when I moved the case around with the power supply in place. That doesn't happen now, everything is nice and secure. And it isn't just the power supply that now drops into place. Let's just get rid of the power supply as we show you different things. Take it out like that. We've also back here now got the mount for an SSD. So if I take an SSD, 2.5-inch SSD, drops in like that. And to be honest, it will probably hold itself in place just like that. But there's also a screw hole here into which a screw can be added to really secure the SSD. I've also made a front piece. Here it is. And this has got holes for the power switch and also the front USB ports, as well as 31 other holes for front air intake. There'll be a grill behind this, and it will of course go on the front of the case, something like that. I've also made a top. Here is our top, and just before we put it on, I'll show you a side where you can see we have a lip. And this means we can take the top, drop it into place against the lip. It's nice and secure that way. It drops in and goes under another lip at the front like that, which means if I try and lift it here now, it's actually secured at the front. It isn't secured at the back, it will come up like that, but do not fear. If we turn the case around something like this, we will see on the back we have got a couple of holes. And we've got those holes because inside the case, it's like magic tricks, isn't it? Inside the case, we have a couple of captive nuts. And these are held in place very securely with both little bits of plastic on the sides and some super glue. And this means we can take the top, drop it on the case like this, and then put some screws into the back, and everything will be very solid indeed. As you probably noticed, we've also got on the top of the case some more holes for another vent. You probably see my hand under there. And in terms of cooling, that's all we're going to have. We're going to have the holes on the top, the vent on the top, vent on the front. The power supplies we saw earlier will pull in air inside the case and push hot air out the back. I think that'll probably be enough for the kind of boards I'll be using in this case. And I could add, if I needed to, in the future, a front fan, a front 60mm fan would easily drop in the front like this. We could have a fan under here on the top if necessary. And indeed, of course, I could just build another top in the future. That's a great thing about building your own case. You can keep changing things around. So all I need to do now is to take the case and put on the front, because obviously that needs to be in place. And then I'm going to take some of this, some filler, and go around all the edges, fill all the edges, after which the case will look like this. And then there'll be several iterations of sanding and filling before paint can be applied. Oh, and if you want to know more about building things out of ABS sheet, all the practicalities and techniques, things like that, I've got a video all about it over on my Christopher Barnett YouTube channel. Guess what? With filing and sanding now complete, the case has paid a visit to my makeshift spray booth, where it's received 4 coats of black paint and 2 top coats of a clear satin lacquer. And now it looks like this. As we can see, I've fitted the power switch and the front USB 3 ports, and very nice they look indeed, and I've also fitted the front ventilation grille. On the top, I've fitted the ventilation mesh there, as well, as it would have been unkind to leave these holes undressed. If we take a look underneath, you can hopefully see black on black. I've fitted 4 rubber feet, and we can also see the screws that hold in the motherboard standoffs. Meanwhile, we switch around to take a look at the back, like that. There we go. You can see I've got the motherboard I/O shield fitted. It's been in and out all the way through the build, and I've also fitted the power supply that's secured in place, and I put in the screws that hold in the top of the case. And you might be able to see I've used washers on these screws and also on the power supply, so I don't damage the plastic and my nice new paint. This said, for now I think we should remove these screws so we can take a look inside. So let's bring in Mr. Screwdriver and do that. There we go, the top now just slides off like that. And it does look like a PC case inside, doesn't it? Because it's all full of wires. Wires from the power supply, wires from the switch, also with an LED, so these are standard headers to go onto the motherboard, and also lots of wires for the front USB 3 ports. And yes, these will have to be unplugged so I can fit the motherboard and plug back in after that. If you're wondering, the final size of the case is 281 by 193 by 94 millimeters, or about 11.1 by 7.6 by 3.7 inches. This means that the case has a volume of 5.1 litres, which, as I intended, is small for a Mini-ITX case with an internal power supply. The total build cost was about £60 excluding the TFX power supply, which is pretty reasonable for a Mini-ITX case. However, £34.19 of this was the cost of the power switch and the front USB 3 ports, adapter and cables, which could have been implemented more cheaply. But I'm very pleased with the final parts I selected. Before we fit the motherboard, I'd note I decided not to line the inside of the case with this aluminium foil for EMI shielding. This means that, in theory, the computer could interfere with things like Wi-Fi or audio equipment. However, today, many computer cases are not remotely close to being a closed Faraday cage due to, for example, transparent side panels. And indeed, people run open rigs all of the time without issues, and so I decided not to bother with the foil. So the last thing to do is to fit the motherboard, and due to the battle ahead with the cables, I think I'll do it the easy way by applying the magic of filmmaking. There we go. My i3 board is now installed in my custom case. It's all gone in. Normally when you're trying to get all the wiring in, you can curse the designer. I can't curse the designer here because I designed the case. And it has all gone in. The front USB cables were a pain. As you can see, it really isn't ideal. There might be better ways to do that. I might investigate that in the future. But I have managed to keep the fan from the power supply. There's a clear line across. You might not be able to see that, but there is a clear line, and obviously the fan on the processor is clearly not obstructed. So let's put the top on the case. I hope it goes on still. In theory it will, and it does. Wow, we can get the top on the case. So let's put in the screws at the back. And there we are. My custom case is completed and fitted with the motherboard, and it feels like a nice little computer. So the only things left to do are, I think, to swizz it round to the back and to fit all the cables. There we go. And if we now transition to a shot of the front, in theory, I can now press the power switch and this computer will work. And this is the very first time I've done this. You're seeing it just as I am live, as it were. Let's have a go. I'm slightly nervous about this. Is it going to work? Oh, it's a blue power switch. I didn't know it was a blue LED. That is nice. I can hear a bit of fan noise, and so clearly everything is working. My DIY custom Mini-ITX case build is complete. Building this case has been a very rewarding experience, which I hope may have given you a few ideas. I'm sure some of you are wondering about temperatures, and I have run some tests using the version of Linux Mint that was on the SSD, and these revealed that after about half an hour the system was idling at no more than 30 degrees. I then ran a half-hour Blender render, which generally settled in the mid to high 50s with a maximum of 61, so there were no temperature issues. But now that's it for another video. If you've enjoyed what you've seen here, please press that like button. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe, and I hope to talk to you again very soon.